Hey everybody, it's Rich from Korg, and today I'm going to give you a little jump start on customizing and designing your own drum kits in our workstation keyboards. So this will be relevant for the M50 and the M3 and the Oasis, and a lot of these concepts will also carry over to the Triton series and the Karma as well. So I think you're going to be really pleasantly surprised with how tweakable these sounds are. So once you start organizing samples into drum kits, you have a lot of flexibility with the individual sounds. So let's get to it. Normally when you play with a drum kit, you're doing it from program mode or within a combi or in a sequence. But to do any editing of a drum kit, you really need to be in global mode. Now while we're here, you can actually customize some settings that are important for saving your own drum kits. So for example, if I go to System Preferences here, I would want to make sure that drum kit is unchecked. So that means I can customize the drum kits and save my own. Now after you do that, press the Page Select button, and that's if you're on the M50 or the M3. The Triton family and the Oasis will all have the menu button. Then touch Drum Kit. Now right from here we're looking deep into one of the drum kits, and you can see which drum kit we're looking at right there. Studio Standard Kit. And if I touch the arrow here, I can choose one of the other kits, scroll over, and see the empty slots where I can place my own custom kits that I can design from scratch. So let's take a look at this first tab. It's called Sample Setup. Right at the top here you can see a little picture of the keyboard, and right there it says D3. That's the key that we're looking at. Now if I want to change that, I can do so with the dial, or I can hold down the Enter button and just press the key that I want to customize. You could also use the value slider, the increment decrement buttons, but that Enter and key shortcut is really useful. So this Assign checkbox is checked. That means the key is going to be triggering some samples, and here are the samples that it's using. Now this is a pretty complex snare drum. It's using 4 different samples, and you can see the difference in loudness here. Very loud, not quite as loud, a little quieter, and a little quieter yet. And those samples are going to match up to how hard we hit the key. So here we're looking at drum sample number 1. That's the loudest one. Its level is set at 45. Its bottom velocity is 102. That means that I have to hit the key with a velocity of 102 to trigger that sample. And remember that the velocities go from 0 to 127. So right as I get up towards the top, that's when I'm hearing that sample. If I play softer, I'm cycling through the other samples. So this will be the quietest one. And now that's the piano sample, slightly louder, the forte, and there you go. Now the cool thing is you can actually crossfade between these different samples, and this particular drum is doing that with the top 2 layers. So I'm going to jump over to the Velocity Split tab, and you can actually see the crossfading taking place. So right from here I can adjust the bottom velocity and the crossfade range. So you can see as I customize that, the range changes on screen. So you can really get very deep, and the cool thing about it is that the end result is a snare drum that reacts the way a normal snare drum would. Instead of suddenly switching velocities, you have a little grace period where it blends from one sound to the other. So it's a very natural sound. You can also adjust the curve of the crossfade itself, from linear to power to layer. And layering sounds obviously means you can just have both of them together. So that's great if you want to have like a clap and a snare doing the same exact thing. I'll jump back, Page Select, Drum Kit. I went back too far. Let's check out the second tab. That's called Sample Parameter. Now we're still dealing with the same samples here. This is the loudest one, this is the quietest one going across, and now we have some additional parameters. I can transpose, I can tune the snare, and this is just for the top layer here, and then less loud and quieter and even quieter still. So each one of those 4 layers has all these customization capabilities. Transpose, tune, attack, decay, cutoff, and resonance. Individual filter settings for each layer, so really tweakable. Moving to the third tab, Driver and EQ. You get to use different amounts of drive for each layer in the sample. So that's a very cool thing, especially for kick drums that you want to have a little extra boost, a little extra boom to them. You can adjust the low boost as well as the drive. And each one of these samples has a 3-band EQ you can modify. And you can see there have been some tweaks done by our genius programmers here. Now, if we jump across to the next tab, Voice/Mixer, you can modify even more parameters. So, for example, single trigger. That means that every time you hit the note, it'll restart it, so the note won't continue to ring out after you re-trigger it. Exclusive group. You can set a whole bunch of different exclusive groups here from 0 to 127. And what that is each group will play monophonically. So, for example, if I have an open hi-hat and a closed hi-hat in my drum kit, I would set them both to the same exclusive group, whatever the number might be. And that means that when I trigger the open hi-hat and then the closed one, the open hi-hat will stop. So it'll behave like a natural hi-hat would. So anywhere that you have multiple keys with the same type of drum but a slightly different performance of that drum, you might want to set them to the same exclusive group, because that's a really useful thing to make the drum sound more natural. Enable note on receive and note off receive. Useful if you want keys to sound and stop on command. Generally, you don't have to modify these settings. By default, they'll be the way that you need them. You can adjust the overall panning and send the drums to the insert and master effects. Now, here's a little tip for people that are using the M3 or the Oasis, or a Triton, which can also sample as well. Right up top here, when you're choosing the samples in the Sample Setup tab, above the light gray arrow is a darker gray arrow. And here you can select from mono or stereo. In the M3 or any of our other sample-based sampling workstations, you can actually select ROM or RAM sample banks as well. So you can choose from WAV files that you've got, and they don't have to be multi-samples. They can just be any sample that you've got on your storage medium.